why America's pressure campaign against Iran may have reached its limits. What if one of the most heavily sanctioned countries on Earth has actually become harder to pressure than ever before? What if decades of economic restrictions and diplomatic isolation have produced the exact opposite of the intended result? Dear viewers, you are on the channel Info Vector. With you is Daniel Brooks, and today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most important geopolitical questions of 2026, why Iran continues to remain a major regional power despite years of external pressure, and why many analysts believe the strategic balance in the Middle East is changing faster than most policymakers expected. This is not a story about a single military operation, a single political leader, or a single crisis. It is a story about geography, economics, technology, energy security, and the emergence of a new global order. To understand Iran's position today, we need to begin with something far older than politics: geography. Unlike Iraq, Kuwait, or much of the Arabian Peninsula, Iran is not an open desert. It is a vast highland plateau surrounded by some of the most challenging terrain in the region. Massive mountain ranges stretch across large portions of the country, creating natural defensive barriers that have influenced military planning for centuries. Military historians often point out that geography remains one of the most underestimated factors in modern strategy. Technology may evolve rapidly, but mountains, deserts, and coastlines still shape the decisions of governments and armed forces. Iran's western frontier is dominated by the Zagros Mountains, a rugged system extending for roughly 1,500 kilometers. To the north, additional mountain chains create further obstacles. Any large-scale ground operation would face enormous logistical challenges long before reaching major population centers. This geographic reality has shaped Iranian defense planning for decades. Rather than relying solely on conventional military strength, Tehran has invested heavily in dispersion, redundancy, and hardened infrastructure. Many strategic facilities have reportedly been placed underground or distributed across multiple locations, making them more difficult to target and reducing dependence on any single site. But geography alone does not explain Iran's resilience. Perhaps even more important is the country's political and cultural history. Iran is one of the world's oldest continuously existing civilizations. Over thousands of years, it has experienced foreign invasions, regional conflicts, economic hardship, and major political transformations. This long historical memory has contributed to a national identity that many observers describe as unusually resistant to external pressure. One of the recurring themes in international relations is that outside pressure does not always weaken governments. In some cases, it strengthens internal cohesion. Throughout modern history, numerous countries have experienced what political scientists call the rally around the flag effect, where external pressure increases public support for national institutions. Supporters of Iran's current leadership often argue that sanctions and foreign pressure have reinforced national unity rather than undermining it. Critics dispute the extent of this effect, but few deny that Iran has demonstrated remarkable endurance under circumstances that might have destabilized many other states. Yet Iran's influence extends far beyond its borders. Its most significant source of leverage may not be found in military bases, industrial facilities, or political institutions. Instead, it lies in one of the most strategically important waterways on the planet: the Strait of Hormuz. Every day, a substantial portion of the world's energy exports passes through this narrow maritime corridor, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Indian Ocean. For decades, economists have described Hormuz as one of the critical choke points of the global economy. Any disruption there has the potential to affect energy markets, shipping costs, insurance rates, and industrial production far beyond the Middle East. This reality creates a strategic dilemma for policymakers around the world. Unlike many geopolitical disputes, the importance of Hormuz is not ideological, it is mathematical. Millions of barrels of oil move through these waters every day. Large quantities of liquefied natural gas also transit the region. Major Asian economies depend heavily on these supply routes, making stability in the area a matter of national interest for countries far removed from the Gulf itself. The challenge is that maintaining uninterrupted maritime traffic is far more complicated than simply deploying naval forces. Modern maritime security involves an enormous range of variables: commercial shipping, insurance markets, surveillance networks, logistics systems, energy infrastructure, and regional politics. Even relatively limited disruptions can create uncertainty that spreads rapidly through global markets. Energy traders do not wait for complete closures before reacting. Insurance companies do not wait for confirmed disruptions before adjusting premiums. Investors do not wait for shortages before reassessing risk. As a result, perception often becomes nearly as important as reality. This is where Iran's strategic position becomes particularly significant. Many analysts argue that Tehran does not necessarily need to dominate the sea lanes militarily in order to influence global calculations. The mere possibility of instability can force governments, corporations, and markets to reconsider assumptions that were previously taken for granted. This creates leverage, and leverage matters, especially in an era where economic competition increasingly shapes geopolitical outcomes. For decades, sanctions have been one of the primary tools used against Iran. The expectation was straightforward: economic pressure would eventually force major political or strategic concessions. However, by 2026, a growing number of observers argue that sanctions may be encountering diminishing returns. The reason is simple: countries adapt. When restrictions remain in place for years or decades, governments begin building alternative systems. Supply chains change. Financial networks evolve. Domestic industries emerge to replace foreign suppliers. The process is rarely efficient, and it often comes with significant economic costs. But over time, adaptation becomes possible. Iran provides one of the most prominent examples of this phenomenon. Despite extensive restrictions, the country has continued developing industrial capabilities across a wide range of sectors. Energy production, manufacturing, engineering, pharmaceuticals, and technology have all received increased attention as policymakers sought to reduce external dependencies. Supporters of this strategy describe it as economic self-sufficiency. Critics argue that it has imposed substantial costs on living standards and long-term growth. Both perspectives contain elements of truth. The reality is more complicated than either side often acknowledges. Iran's economy continues to face serious challenges, including inflation, currency instability, and limited access to international financial systems. At the same time, the country has demonstrated a capacity for adaptation that many external observers underestimated. Perhaps the most important lesson is not whether sanctions succeeded or failed. It is that economic pressure rarely operates in a simple, linear way. Sometimes restrictions weaken a state. Sometimes they encourage innovation. And sometimes they do both simultaneously. By 2026, Iran appears to be a case where pressure has generated significant costs while also accelerating efforts to build alternative economic structures. The question now is whether those structures are strong enough to support Iran's ambitions in an increasingly multipolar world. And that brings us to the next chapter of this story. Because geography and economics are only part of the equation, Iran's broader influence depends on a much larger network, one that stretches across multiple countries, multiple theaters, and multiple layers of regional politics. And understanding that network may be the key to understanding why the Middle East of 2026 looks very different from the Middle East of just a decade ago. The discussion surrounding Iran's role in the Middle East often focuses on geography and economics, but there is another dimension that is equally important: regional influence. Over the past several decades, Iran has invested heavily in relationships, partnerships, and political networks across the region. Whether viewed as a security strategy, a foreign policy doctrine, or a response to external threats, the result has been the emergence of a complex system of influence extending far beyond Iran's own borders. For policymakers in Washington, this creates a unique challenge. Unlike traditional state-to-state competition, Modern regional dynamics involve governments, political movements, security organizations, economic partnerships, and informal networks operating simultaneously. As a result, developments in one country can rapidly affect multiple others. Many analysts describe this as a layered security architecture. Instead of relying exclusively on conventional military power, influence is distributed across numerous actors and institutions. This makes the regional environment significantly more complex than it was during previous decades. From Tehran's perspective, such a system provides strategic depth. From the perspective of its rivals, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty remains one of the most powerful forces in international politics. The importance of this network becomes even clearer when viewed alongside recent technological developments. For much of the modern era, military superiority was often measured by the size of a country's air force, navy, or defense budget. Today, the equation is changing. The rapid spread of drones, precision-guided systems, advanced surveillance platforms, cyber capabilities, and long-range missile technologies has altered traditional assumptions about power projection. Military planners around the world are increasingly debating whether expensive legacy platforms remain as dominant as they once were. The discussion is not limited to any single country. It applies globally. The years ahead will determine whether competition gives way to cooperation or whether existing tensions continue to define the region's future. But one thing appears increasingly certain. Lasting solutions will require diplomacy, strategic thinking, and a realistic understanding of the interests of all major actors involved. Thank you for watching. Do you believe the balance of power in the Middle East is fundamentally changing? And what role will Iran play in shaping the next chapter of regional politics? Let us know below. This was Daniel Brooks. See you in the next Analytical Reviews.